Here's something that's probably happened to you at least once. You're sitting at dinner. Someone mentions something completely ordinary. Maybe they say the word flamingo, or someone brings up ancient Rome. And suddenly, out of nowhere, your brain fires off this little missile of information that you didn't even know you were storing. You open your mouth and you say something like, "Did you know flamingos are actually born white and they turn pink because of the shrimp they eat?" And then the table goes quiet for a second, and someone laughs, and someone else says, "How do you even know that?" And honestly, you have no idea. You just do. If that sounds familiar, this video is for you. Because that moment, that little spark where a random fact just appears, isn't as accidental as it seems. There's a whole psychological story behind why some people's brains collect these things like other people collect sneakers or vintage records, and understanding it might just change the way you see yourself entirely. Let's start with the obvious question people always ask. Why would your brain bother holding on to something useless? I mean, your brain is already doing a million things, regulating your heartbeat, processing language, storing your fears and your childhood memories and your Wi-Fi password. Why would it also be quietly archiving the fact that a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance, or that the inventor of the Pringles can was actually buried in one? Here's the thing. Your brain doesn't actually decide what's useful. That's a conscious judgment you make. Your brain, at a deeper level, stores what it finds interesting. And interesting, neurologically speaking, is just another word for emotionally activated. When you encounter a piece of information that surprises you, delights you, or creates a tiny little spike of, "Wait, what?" your brain tags it. It releases a small hit of dopamine. And dopamine, among other things, is your brain's way of saying, "Remember this." It's the same chemical reward loop behind why people check their phones compulsively or why sugar is so hard to resist. But in this case, the trigger isn't a notification or a candy bar. It's a weird fact about the invention of bubble wrap, which, by the way, was originally meant to be wallpaper. So, the first thing to understand about people who collect random facts is that their brains are highly tuned to novelty. Psychologists call this being high in a trait called openness to experience, one of the big 5 personality dimensions. People who score high in openness are naturally drawn to new ideas, unusual connections, and things that don't fit neatly into the expected. Their brains are essentially set to a slightly higher sensitivity for the interesting. A fact that might slide off another person's mind like water off a raincoat will stick to them like Velcro. It's not that they're trying harder to remember, it's that their neurological reward system finds the process of discovery genuinely pleasurable in a way that reinforces itself over and over. But there's more going on here than just personality type. Think about the people in your life who seem to have an endless supply of random knowledge. There's usually something warm and curious about them. They tend to be people who read widely, who get genuinely excited about things, who go down rabbit holes at 2 in the morning because one Wikipedia page led to another. And often, if you look a little closer, there's something else. They've often felt at some point in their lives like a bit of an outsider, like their interests didn't quite map on to what everyone around them was excited about. There's a reason for that connection. Research in developmental psychology suggests that children who feel socially uncertain or who don't find their emotional footing through conventional social channels often redirect that energy into knowledge seeking. Learning becomes a way of building confidence. Knowing things becomes a form of identity. The kid who gets nervous at parties but can tell you everything about how black holes work isn't escaping reality. They're constructing a version of reality where they have something solid to stand on. And those facts they collected, they stay. They become part of who that person is. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not saying everyone who remembers random facts had a difficult childhood. Plenty of fact collectors are simply curious, high-openness people who grew up in stimulating environments and were encouraged to ask questions. But it's worth noticing that for many people, the relationship between knowledge and self-worth is quietly tangled together in a way they've never fully examined. Here's another layer that most people completely miss. The way we remember things is not random. It's deeply tied to meaning-making. Your brain doesn't store information like a filing cabinet where you open a drawer and pull out a folder. Memory is reconstructive. Every time you recall something, you rebuild it slightly, and the facts that stick most powerfully are the ones that connected to something you already cared about, or challenged something you already believed, or gave you language for something you'd already felt. That flamingo fact stuck, maybe, because you've always been a little obsessed with animals, or because it was the first time you felt smart in front of a group, or because someone you admired told it to you once. The fact was never really just a fact. It was a small story about your life, compressed into a sentence. This is why people who remember random facts often have remarkable associative minds. They don't just know things in isolation, they know how things connect. They'll hear a conversation about architecture, and suddenly they're telling you about how the Romans used to put honey in their concrete because it made it more pliable. And somehow that leads through a conversation about Byzantine trade routes. And 20 minutes later, you've traveled through 3 centuries of history without even noticing. This kind of mind, the one that weaves, that links, that finds pattern and narrative everywhere, is actually one of the hallmarks of creative thinking. Research consistently shows that divergent thinking, the ability to connect seemingly unrelated ideas, is central to creativity. And people who hoard facts, they're building a vast web of potential connections inside their heads, even when they're not consciously trying to. There's actually a beautiful term from the writer Nassim Taleb. He talks about something called anti-fragility. The idea that some things don't just survive chaos, they actually get stronger because of it. Random knowledge is a little like that. In a world that increasingly rewards specialization, the person who knows a little bit about everything becomes unexpectedly valuable at the moments when narrow expertise isn't enough. They're the ones in a meeting who say, there was a similar situation in the 1920s when Kodak. They're the ones whose brains are already pattern matching before the problem is fully on the table. What looks like trivia in small talk becomes insight in the right context. And maybe that's the reframe worth sitting with. Maybe the question isn't why you remember useless facts. Maybe the real question is who decided they were useless in the first place. Because uselessness is always relative to context, and context changes. The person who memorized the chemical composition of common household materials in high school because it was interesting might be the exact person who, 30 years later, knows how to solve a problem no one else in the room can figure out. Knowledge doesn't expire, it waits. So, if you're someone who has a brain full of seemingly random information, who knows which US president had a pet alligator in the White House, or how long it would take to fall through the earth if there were a tunnel through it, I want you to hear this. Your brain is not broken. It is not scattered or unfocused or too much. It is alive in a specific way. It is hungry. It finds the world genuinely, persistently interesting. And in a time when attention is being engineered to shrink and focus has become a commodity, a brain that is still delighted by the sheer strangeness of existing on this planet is not a liability. It's a gift. The next time you drop a random fact into a conversation and someone looks at you like you've just produced a rabbit from a hat, let yourself enjoy it. That little flash of surprise on their face, that's your brain doing exactly what it was built to do, making the world feel a little more alive, a little more connected, a little more worth paying attention to. If this video felt like someone finally put language to something you've always felt about the way your brain works, I'd love it if you left a comment. Tell me the most random fact you've ever remembered at the perfect moment. And if you want more of this kind of deep dive into the psychology of everyday experience, subscribing would mean the world. There's a lot more strangeness to explore, and I have a feeling your brain is going to enjoy every second of it.